maybe their feet get sore. Maybe they like a good foot rub just because, right? Well, maybe you put your big boy panties on and rub your wife's feet, right? Why? There's no why. You love your wife or you love your husband. That's why you do it.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome. I'm here today for the second time with David P. Robbins, who is a therapist. And since we're talking about relationships today, another qualification of his is he is married with 3 kids. So he has some success on the subject matter we're talking about. So welcome.
Thank you for having me again.
So I guess we'll start off. We can use a single case study design. I'm a 38-year-old single man trying to navigate the dating market. Like, what should I know?
Oh gosh. Well, a question I have is, while you're navigating that dating market, how are you attempting to navigate the dating market? So are you doing the apps? Are you not?
So I got off the apps about 6 months ago, and it's just kind of people I meet, So last person I went on a date with was from like a Christian yoga group I went to.
You said Christian yoga group?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. How'd that work out? I mean,
it didn't go anywhere, but just kind of continued to explore.
And the reason I ask is, and I don't. This is the one bit of data I wasn't completely sure on, but I was looking. Before this, I was looking at data on the dating apps, right? And so, let's look at some numbers because I think they are instructive a little bit here. So Tinder. So let's forget anything we might want to think about the nature of the Tinder environment in terms of anybody's morals, ethics, viewpoints. Why is anybody on there in the first place? Any or all of that, right?
Just pragmatism.
Yeah, very much. So in terms of the sum total of all users on Tinder, okay, it is 78.1% men-ish and 21.9% women. So it doesn't take anybody with a math degree or it shouldn't. You should be able to reason out pretty quickly that if you're a dude on Tinder, it does not favor you. The odds are not in your favor at all. So that's a pretty big margin, right? And that's just Tinder. If you want a little extra Tinder data, so I had to look these things up because I am happily married and I've never been on any of these apps. So, I hear from young people and some of my patients and stuff. So here's a fun other little Tinder statistic. Let's see. Where'd it go? I thought let's see. Men, there it is. Men swipe right on average 16,368 times compared to women. So swiping right is you want to match, right? I believe that's what it is.
Yeah.
Compared to women, 2,283 times. So the app, for whatever reason, it is skewing towards the app favors, that particular app favors women, right? So if you're, I think it goes without saying, if you're a man and you're looking to find someone to date and you're using Tinder as that vehicle, good luck, sir. The odds are against you. And I'm going to get a little crude here because I want people to understand. I was having difficulty finding some specific data on this, but it's are you familiar with the 666?
Like the mark of the beast?
No, not that mark. Well, it might as well be, but so the 666 in regards to, and I think it does kind of skew on Tinder a little bit as well. So a lot of women on there, they're looking for a unicorn. So they're looking for a man that has middle to high 6-figure income. That already rules out almost everybody anyway. And it doesn't matter what other attribute you throw in there. Like, any other attribute you throw in after that is going to drop the pool to begin with. So they're looking for middle to high six-figure income. They're looking for a man that is 6 feet tall or higher. And this is the crude part. They're looking for a 6-inch member. That's what they're looking for. They want
and six-pack abs.
And, oh, well, all right, the quad six.
The quad six.
The six-pack abs. But the issue there is, a lot of the, one, that's a unicorn. There's a neat, I forget the website, but there's a neat website that I think, as far as I can tell, I think it uses some Bayesian statistics and stuff. So, you start putting in attributes that you want in a person that you might want to date, and it'll give you the percentage likelihood that person even exists. And that's not even accounting for how good their personality is or whether or not they're a decent person. That's just, does the human exist on the planet with those basic attributes, right?
So I mean, you've got like women looking for like 0.1% of the population.
Left.
And a lot of men are just having like no luck. I mean, when I talk to my male friends, like the app seemed like a disaster. Like I had a lot of first dates, very few second dates when I was on the apps.
Okay.
I talk to women, it's the same thing. Like they're not satisfied with the apps, and it's like people don't know what other options there are, because like it seems weird to meet people in real life now.
Yeah, and that's a thing where, again, I'll be 48 this year. Again, been married 22 years. So, as a cliche Gen Xer, and especially, again, having been married that long, I don't know anything different other than what I experienced, which is there were no dating apps. I think eHarmony might have existed back then, but other than that, and when I was, fresh out of high school, the internet barely was a thing. And eHarmony didn't exist in the mid-'90s, I don't believe, like in 95 or whatever. So I personally don't know a different way, right? I don't know, I wouldn't know the first thing about, how do you find someone, on a dating app, right? But I say this because, so like, before we started, we're talking about being, men of faith, right? And so I knew that I was aware of there being at least a couple of Christian dating apps. So, what's the name? Christian Mingle. I don't know if you've tried that one.
No.
So Christian Mingle is an interesting one because women greatly, I couldn't find an exact number, but they say that the women greatly outnumber the men on that app. So
interesting, very interesting. That'd be the only one. I feel like.
Yeah. Well, and then it also, at least if we can trust the oracle that is the internet, says coffee meets bagel and eHarmony also women outnumber men.
Interesting. Okay.
So. So if people, I'm starting there just because if people are wanting to utilize, the internet for dating, like the first thought I have, because then this will lead into the other things in regards to like dating and marriage and all of that. I think the first thing that, people need to kind of consider is, all right, well, you need to know like what you're doing and what's the nature of the environment that you're doing it in. So, again, if you're a guy that wants to get on Tinder and try Tinder, well, you need to go into it with realistic expectations to begin with, right? Because if you don't, and you don't know that, it's 70-some% men and 20-some percent, 78% men and 21% women, if you don't know that, right, it's you're going to be sorely disappointed, right? So, but yeah, like so let's say we're going to try and do the dating stuff, without the dating apps. I mean, again, I'm of the vintage that you met people through work, you met people through friends, you met people through family members, and then The scariest version was always the cold call in a coffee shop. Yeah, but we did it, and I guess I have a question for you, because I do hear this out of people, and this isn't just videos on the TikToks and the YouTubes and such. I physically hear this out of people, which is there's a lot of young people that I would not have pegged for being overly apprehensive about going up to someone and just trying to talk to them and get their number. And you might know this better than I do, but there's a lot of people, people much younger than even you, that are saying that scares them. And of course, I think that's kind of that's an interesting problem. It's scaring them enough to where they don't want to run the risk, right? So we've staged humanity into a situation, everyone staged into this situation where, like a lot of things, I think the advent of any advanced tech that can make things easier and more efficient leads to, or it can, I won't say it categorically does and exclusively does across all domains, but it leads to laziness, right? In a fashion. And I don't mean laziness in the traditional sense of that. I just mean that in the sense of, the dating app, it takes a lot of steps out, right? In principle, you upload, well, that's assuming anybody's actually being honest on those things anyway, right? But, you input your parameters, such as it is, your pertinent particulars, and then you can. It's sort of like the methed out version of speed dating. I don't know if those speed dating. Have you ever?
Yeah, I went to speed dating once, probably 10 years ago, and that's a good comparison, because it's like that on steroids.
Yeah, and I would argue I think the speed dating thing is in theory almost a better option than the app, just because you're in front of the person, right? And so I'm leading with all of this because, from my perspective, just as a fellow human and as a therapist, but also as I have a newly minted 18-year-old in my house, my oldest now, who has literally no interest in dating at the moment, which is fine by me. But also, I do kind of examine the landscape because, if they do have some questions or some issues, I'd like to be able to help where I can. And so I think it's important to apprehend the issues here and apprehend the landscape that everyone's navigating with this, right? And I think one of the other things that this leads to is, because how many, in general, with communication, right? Texting, right? I couldn't find it, the one I wanted to reference, but I saw a study. I don't know if it was a meta-analysis, but I thought what I was looking for, what I had seen was, and it was talking about basically the number of people that they don't do well with phone calls.
Like phone call anxiety.
Yes.
Yeah. That's wow.
And I think even during the pandemic, I don't know if you remember, but there were life coaches basically popping up that were doing coaching consulting calls for young people who didn't know how to navigate a phone interview. Do you remember this?
Yes, yeah.
So we've kind of gotten into this weird spot, and I think in general, and of course we're in the United States, so we'll pick on everybody here, but I think we've gotten into this weird little spot where, people want to, the least amount of effort, right? And again, I don't mean that as just like how that typically sounds. I'm trying to look at that empirically, if you will. Like the data suggests we're doing things that are the least amount of effort. And I think where that leads to a problem is, there's a question then I have, which is, well, are younger generations not quite as good at communicating, right? Especially in person. And it is a very different animal to communicate via a veil that is texting, an app, all of that. It's a very different animal to communicate that way versus, sitting in front of a human, right? I think everybody knows that. But I think then by extension, all right, well, what do you do? What do you do when you are in front of the person? Now, there's still that inherent, like, a little bit of that apprehension, even like if you use an app and you decide, hey, we're going to meet up, right? We're going to meet up in person. There's always going to be a little bit of that awkwardness, right? Like, that's always going to kind of be there, but that's our landscape. I mean, unless you think I'm missing like a major point there, that appears to be our landscape, right? So I don't know. Apart from everyone just needs to quit using the dating apps, and quit being so hung up on texting. I don't know what the solution to all of those problems are. But again, I always, when I have conversations with people in groups about that sort of thing, I always lead with, look, this is the landscape we're looking at. For better or worse, this is what part of what we're dealing with. Now, your particular, so we're going to, as you say, we got a little teeny weeny sample size here, right? We got the teeny weeny sample size of me and being married, my family, and, an N of one for you as a 38-year-old dude that's trying to navigate the dating landscape, right? I don't know if order is important, but I'm just going to lead with this then. The best piece of advice I feel like, especially like as a man of faith, the best piece of advice that I got from one of the elders' wives at a church that we used to go to is where I met my wife, actually. It was before I met my wife, and I was, I'm getting into my mid-20s. It's the typical thing, at that age, it seems like everyone and everyone around you is getting married and having a family, and, you start getting the FOMO and all the things, right? I know me personally, I'd kind of like to have some of this going before I get too terribly old, right? Like, you get that thinking. And, but this really nice woman, I didn't necessarily like a lot of things she had to say, but sometimes a broken clock's correct twice a day, and she actually said something I thought was pretty good, which was, and this is whether I think you can apply this whether you're a person of faith or not. I think this is just good psychology, really. Which was, she said, look, take out a piece of paper, write down everything you think you want and or need in a spouse. And she said, that's right on down to if you have an eye color preference, a hair color preference, she's like, you can be vain about it if you want to. But, write those things down. That's also things, such as, do you, how traditional, as a lot of people call it these days, how quote unquote traditional household do you want? Like, are you okay with both of you working? Do you both want kids? You get the idea. Like, anything and everything you can think of. She said, write it down. Now, in the Christian, person of faith context, she said, write it all down, pray about it, throw it away. And then I said, okay, well then what do you do? He said, you got to work to not think about it so much, right? Which is not, she never suggested you don't concern yourself with it. It was just, I sort of take it as, like, think classical mechanics and physics, equal and opposite reaction. Like, if I'm pushing against a wall, the wall's pushing up back against me as hard as I'm pushing against it, right? And especially like if you're doing things a certain way and you're not getting, the same result, right? Maybe we need to do something a little different. And a big part of what I took out of that was just, all right, well, because she did point out, like, you don't know. She also didn't get all dogmatic about God has a plan. She didn't even say that. She just said, you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe you're going to get married. Maybe you're not. Maybe you'll be married twice. Maybe you'll be married 3 times. She was pretty even-handed about it, which, if you knew this person, was not necessarily characteristic for her. But she was on this one. So on the non-spiritual version, I think is very similar. Just, well, what do you think you want and need, right? Now, by extension, so, you and I are, we're psychology people, right? So, then I think, okay, and I tell patients this when they ask questions about this. I talk about this with my kids. I kind of say this to a lot of people, and again, this is all in no particular order, but I think one thing people need to do is, one, make sure that you're striving to be the best version of yourself that you can be. Because if you wish to be married and have a long-term committed relationship and possibly even have children with this person, you need to make sure that you're the best version of yourself you can be. Now, we're always in a state of flux, right? So Maslow's self-actualization is technically unattainable. I think even Maslow conceded that later in his later years, but mostly because, again, we're always in a state of flux. You're never gonna, you'll reach one plateau just to have another above you at some point on something. But I think, if you have some hang-ups, you should probably work on those, right?
So I want to throw in a statistic and then some anecdotes and see where we can go from there.
Okay.
I saw it was a stat from a survey about the fantasies of Gen Z, and it was 25% of Gen Z fantasizes about BDSM or something like that. But the highest fantasy, 81% of Gen Z fantasize about monogamy.
I saw that.
Wow. It's I'm reminded of the story old school sailors would tell when they're out in the middle of the ocean, water everywhere, not a drop to drink because it's salt water. It's options everywhere, and you can't find a fulfilling relationship. So it's not everyone, but most people want that. That's what they're looking for, and we can't seem to be matching each other up. Is this an expectations issue? What's going on?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about it from that angle. But I saw that same statistic, and that was a head scratcher. Both because that was not what I was expecting to see, and if you account for a crazy wide margin of error, let's assume that data is real and valid and reliable, dependable, right? If you account for a stupidly large margin of error, let's do a minus. We won't even do a plus. Let's do a minus 20 points, right? That's still a 61%. That's still a stupidly large number, right? So what does that mean? All right, well, let's go with the idea that, a majority of the Gen Zers, they have fantasies about, they want monogamy. Well, so I have the question I have there is, okay, if that many people want monogamy, and you talk about expectations, right? So, if that many people want monogamy, what's the problem? Right? So, is it, expectations? So, I think the devil's in the details there, right? What do they envision? And I haven't had time to dive into that particular thing. I don't know if you did, but I'm curious about what what are they envisioning as monogamy, right? I'm not saying they don't know what basic monogamy is. What I'm getting at is, all right, well, what's that look like for them? So is it, do they have some fantasy, romanticized Hollywood, Jane Austen version of a. I mean, what are they wanting? That's what I want to know.
I feel like the expectations thing has to be a huge piece, because it's like I desperately want to settle down and have a monogamous relationship with the perfect person. And I feel like men, for one, we've got like these dating apps where there's this illusion of infinite possibilities, where this mythical perfect person is out there and they're one swipe away. Then you've also got men looking at pornography and Instagram models, so we're setting our visual appeal like at this unattainably high level. Women reading romance novels about a jacked billionaire who wrestles alligators for fun, and they've got like this completely unrealistic expectation there. And neither of us are ever meeting this person, because that person doesn't really exist, And it's like I can kind of retreat into fantasy where this still remains a possibility. Whereas if I settle down and commit to somebody, that fantasy disappears, and I'm with a real person at that point.
Yeah. And I think one thing I would say on that is, something that I don't know if I've ever heard it really quite this way. I think I've heard some other people say similar things, but I have this thing in my own psychology that I've developed over the years that I call the trade principle. So as you apply that to other humans and even yourself. So one, rarely is anybody going to be 100% in anything. Consistency is a striving towards 100% on a thing. However, the likelihood of any one person being 100% consistent in any domain, it doesn't matter what it is, right? That, the likelihood of that expresses a whole number is basically zero. Now, we can do good enough, right? So if you think like, what was it, a Winnicott, Good Enough Mother, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's, by extension, I think the good enough partner, the good enough person, I think that's, because I think Winnicott, I think in some of those studies that were done, like I think it's in the 70% range, basically as long as in the parent thing, the good enough mother, it was, if you can hit the 70% mark on meeting most of your child's needs, especially the important ones, that's good, decent enough, right? So, and I think that wills out with, with people in general. But when I talk about what I call the trade principle, again, maybe you can find someone that approaches, is starting to maybe approach like a high percentage on a given domain, right? Maybe there's a few domains where they have that. The likelihood of them getting that high in all the rest of the domains is just not going to happen. It isn't. Like, we're humans, we're not robots. We're humans, we're not, we're not characters from a novel. We're humans, we're not characters from a movie or a TV show. So I think, with you talking about expectations, I think people, I don't think they, I don't know if they really realize what some of the stuff, really is. And I don't know if, talk about unrealistic expectations. If, I try not to put too much stock in this, but if the TikToks are any indication, sometimes I hear things on there. I've largely I don't have TikTok on my regular phone anymore. I deleted it, and I don't even do as much with it anymore, even producing content, because sometimes I hear these, I hear these things people are saying. I'm thinking, what kind of unrealistic expectations are you having here out of people, right? And it's hard to gauge it. It's usually a 1 to 2 minute video on the internet. It's hard to gauge the tone and what do people really mean and all that. But also, like, within this trade principle idea, going back to that, think, so if you or anybody's familiar with the idea of an audio mixing board, right? So we won't get too ridiculous with it. We'll just say there's 10 channels. So for the uninitiated, an audio channel is just, that'd be one track of an instrument in a song, right? So like, so I was listening to Tracy Bonham, Mother. I don't know if you know that song from the 90s. Anyway, Yeah, I'm a 90s kid, so. But, like, there's vocals and there's multiple instruments and, there's this descending violin part. And, again, you think about, like, these are all separately recorded tracks, and let's just say they've got everything leveled out and all the volume levels are at 10, right? Well, the moment you dial one thing down, everything sounds completely different. So there's always a trade there as well. You can't dial one thing down without something else standing out, right? And I think this is very true just of people, so that's trait characteristics, that's acquired behaviors. I think it's a little bit of everything. So, and then, as there's a lot of variety in personality, right? And that's both inherent trait characteristics and acquired trait characteristics. There's a lot of variety there. So, and I'm leading into a thing. But do you have a thought? Did you have a?
I'll go ahead with yours, and then I'll jump in.
Well, and so I think going back to what do you want and what do you think you need? What do you think you want? I think it's, along with be the best version of yourself you can be, make sure you've got enough of your garbage sorted, because that's helpful in a relationship, which doesn't mean you're going to have it all sorted. But I think really knowing what you want and being clear about that from the get-go, I think is, because what I was going to lead into is, how did David meet his wife and how did that go? Because what did I do? Because, again, no dating apps. This was just, I met her organically, right? So met her at church. So that was the basic. We ended up being in the same places. Got brave, hijinks ensue, and there we go. Now, some of my examples also not a good example, because we started dating in January and married in July, so... we weren't,
So, earlier, I think the way we were framing it, I think we can kind of nail it down to a little bit more accuracy when you kind of bring up different channels,
Yeah.
I think the way I was conceptualizing it is everyone's holding out for a 10 out of 10 based on some objective characteristic. But I think maybe a little bit more accurate would be I'm looking for a 10 out of 10 based on my own specific scale. And I'll give you one example. January, I went to a friend's birthday party, and I met a woman there, beautiful Christian woman, and she taught at a classical school. And so she had read Plato and Homer. And I'm thinking, my gosh, the odds of me meeting a woman like this, I feel like we would never run out of conversation. I'm just getting so excited. And I asked her out, and she's about to go teach English overseas. And so, nothing was going to happen. I feel like my preference there is like a very specific preference for me that a lot of guys might not have. But for me, that just like lights up the 10 out of 10, if that makes sense. Whereas you may have like a very completely different metric where like this is a 10 for me.
Yeah, and I like the way you frame that, because... the 10 out of 10 for you specifically is not to say that if there is a way to objectively measure any of these traits and any of these things, that that we're saying they tick the box for the 10 in any of those domains. It's just to say the sum total of how we're looking at it, right? I think a good example of this is, go to... I don't know if you have an IKEA near where you're at, but we used to live up in Kansas City, so there's an IKEA up there on the Kansas side. And I tell people, go to IKEA on a Saturday around lunchtime and just sit in the cafeteria and watch people. Look at the couples, right? Now, if you want to get really silly about it, you want to do a good science, they'll be weird about it and hardly anybody will want to answer your question. But, go talk to some of those, we're men. So go talk to some of those men. Have them describe the woman that they're with and that they have kids with, and that especially the ones that like look like they've been married for a long time. Go talk to those men. Talk to any man that's been married, like who genuinely seems to love his wife after, a period of a few decades. you know, you know, they're going to have, usually, they may have rave reviews, but it's not going to be the way think it's going to come out, right? Especially like if men are unfortunately notoriously bad about being able to articulate these things, right? It's a little dumb. I can articulate, stuff pretty well about my wife, but the funny thing is, the reason I reference IKEA is like you'll see like some younger people, I say much younger than me, there. And if you want to judge things by appearances, which you shouldn't, but we all do to some degree anyway, right? It's like, well, why are these people together? And I know people say, well, they love each other. Okay, sure. Well, what drives that, right? Is, I would say, I argue that my wife's a smoke show objectively. However, I've met some really ugly people in my life that were men and women both that were smoke shows. Some horribly ugly people. Like, I'd probably push you down a flight of stairs before I shake your hand type of people. Like, ew. Like, their character is, by anybody's metric is kind of right? So, looks are not everything. Looks will fade. What you're looking for, I would say in general is, again, it goes back to that specific thing. Like, are they a 10 for you? Right? So,
This kind of brings up something for me that I'm just now thinking about, is because there's not one objective standard for 10 out of 10. Everybody has their own metric, but we also don't have like a single unified culture. So if you were dating in the 50s, for instance, you probably lived very close to this other person. You probably went to the same church. You probably did all the same social things. Your families were friends. You know what I mean? And now it's like, you may have like hardly any of those things in common. And you've got to start piecing together kind of this common uniting culture. And it's much more difficult, it seems like, than it used to be.
Yeah, and that brings up a point I was going to make, which is, if, some people will listen to this and they will listen to this point if they made it this far and be like, all right, what's this David guy even droning on about? And I'm going to make some statements here. This isn't even necessarily my opinion. So anybody wants to go read about this, the doctors John and Julie Gottman have probably conducted the most extensive research to the body of research on couples and relationships, period, end of sentence. So I'm saying that right now because if anybody you could almost, listen to the rest of the podcast, but like you could almost just ignore anything I'm saying. Just go read their work. Read their papers, get their books, because and I think the conclusions that they have drawn based on their data are, honestly, I think is some of the best behavioral science out there in general. I feel like they've done a really good job. I don't even agree with everything they say, but for the most part, it's hard to quibble about, because that's always a question when you do research on anything with, especially humans, is the data. It's the conclusion and application, right? It's the conclusions we're drawing and then how we're applying it to people. Like, that's kind of the important part, and I feel like they've probably been the most even-handed out of anybody that's done that kind of research. That's just my opinion. But
agreed.
It's not an opinion that they have, I believe, done the most. They've contributed the most to that area.
By a large margin.
Huge margin. And so in their data, the data is pretty clear. Homogeny is going to be one of your best bets for harmony. So that's a fancy way of saying you need, like, it doesn't mean that you can't have some relative opposites, but truthfully, having the most in common from the get-go is absolutely a good, it's one of many predictors of success for the relationship. Now, the devil's in the details there, because it's, all right, well, which things do we want in common? But I will give you my personal hot take. So I, just as an example, so yeah, I'm a Christian man of faith, so I wanted a strong Christian woman. Now that can look a whole lot of different ways, and there's a lot of varieties of that it could have played out. But so yes, got that in my wife. So we're good there. Forgot I didn't turn those emoji things off. I didn't know I was going to do that. So that's one thing. Another thing was I wanted to have an attempt at having kids. All right, so we got that one. She wanted to have kids as well. We wanted to, whether I was never opposed one way or another about who's going to do the bulk of the work and money making and all that, but we. I definitely wanted to find someone that hopefully wanted to homeschool. I felt pretty strongly about that, so I found, my wife has, wanted to do that as well. So there's kind of some important things there, right? Obviously, I wanted her to be nice, I wanted her to, not be a jerk to me, and vice versa, But, so there's these basic things that I really wanted, to have, right? To borrow a biblical euphemism, not given to too much substances like alcohol or drugs or whatever. Which is to say, like, alcohol's off the table. It's just more of, I'm just not into the party scene. I'm not looking to be pissed drunk at any point ever again in my life. So there are things that are kind of important that I think if you don't know some of that, like what you want, if you don't know some of that before you even date anybody, it doesn't mean that things are going to go poorly. But I would say you really need to know that, right? Like you really need to know some of those things. By extension, though, I will also say outside of that, you also then want as many other things in common as well. And I would say the common day-to-day things, right? As much as you can. So things like, I don't know, what kind of food do you like? If you go out to eat, what kind of food do you it doesn't mean you have to like all the same things, but, like, hopefully there's considerable overlap in that, right? Hopefully there's considerable overlap in some interests. You can have your own personal interests, but, like going through life together is going to be about shared experience, right? And that's not me saying that. The doctors Gottman, pretty as much as we can prove something in human behavior, I think the jury's like, we're settled on that. You need stuff in common so that you can have connection, right? Part of that connection is also having good communication. So what we hope is that, you and whoever you end up being with are decent enough communicators, right? As the Gottmans have so very bluntly pointed out, it takes two people to make the relationship go well. It only takes one to blow it up or one to ruin it. So they put it in slightly different words, but that's what they're saying. So, I think having as much as you can possibly have in common in as many domains as possible is ideal. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that you're looking for a unicorn, right? Mm-hmm. It can be more general, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't have to be super specific. So, like my wife and I like sci-fi. Does my wife like every single sci-fi thing that I like? No. Do I like every single sci-fi thing she likes? No. So it's not, again, it's that trade thing. It's not, reasonable expectations. It's not 100% across the board. And that's fine.
What are some of the biggest red flags you think I should be looking for?
Well, some of it's the old cliche stuff, right? How is that person, how do they appear to treat other people, especially how do they talk about other people when they're not around? And now some of it's obvious, right? So, if they're overly negative and speak poorly, of people in general, and that's just how they roll, you might not want to, you might want to dodge that bullet. I think though consistency in general can be good, even if especially like if it's it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but do they appear to be consistent just in general? Inconsistency is not always great. How do they handle themselves in a crisis? And it's not about do they lose their head. That's not necessarily what I mean. It's if you two are going through a crisis together, because that'll happen. That'll happen if you date somebody long enough, even long before you're married. Like something will come up, right? So yeah, I don't remember who said it, but I saw a joke sort of meme years ago of, if you want to learn about someone, just put them in front of a computer with slow internet. And all kidding aside, there could be some truth to that, right? I think the animal hypothesis is actually there's some data on that. Not so much do they want pets or not want pets, but how do they appear to deal with animals, in particular your common house pets, dogs, cats. I think if someone is vehemently not just opposed to having them, but they just don't like them. It's one thing to say I don't want pets because I don't want the responsibility. That's fair. I can see that, because what if neither of you want kids, but you meet up well otherwise, and maybe you want a dog, but maybe you both want to travel a lot, like a stupid crazy amount. I don't know if I'd have a pet, like if that's what the life I wanted to live, right? But again, it's not about for me, it's not about whether or not they want to have them, but if they just seem to like really hate on, and there are those people. I don't know if you've met any. I have. Mm-hmm. In my experience, they're rather unpleasant people to be around. So I think those. I don't know that. Well, how do they handle their family? Yeah, so I know you're still in grad school, right?
Yeah, I'm in internship.
Yeah, so as you have learned, our family of origin. That can be, the family of origin by itself isn't the issue. It's all right, well, if there's some leftovers, right? If there's traumas, if there's whatever, where's that person at with that? But also, how do those interactions go with the family members? How are they treating people? And it's not even necessarily like, is there conflict or not conflict, because conflict's unavoidable. It's, how are they managing familial conflict, right? How do they talk about it? I think those are things, you kind of have to, look out for and make sure that, all right, if they're talking about so-and-so this way about this issue, well, it doesn't matter what it is. You can usually, by extension, reason out pretty easily. Oh, how's that going to turn out for me? Because patterns repeat themselves. Right.
So I know you have to go here in just a minute, and I wanted to throw you a final question to kind of summarize what we're talking about.
Sure.
If you could fix contemporary dating in 2025 America, you could wave a magic wand. How would you fix things?
Dating apps wouldn't exist. You have to do things more in person. People need to get used to being more uncomfortable in front of other humans. I would also, if there was a way to meaningfully manage and fix everyone's expectations, I definitely would see if I could pull that off. But I'll say it. Someone asked me this earlier today, a similar thing earlier today. So you could almost forget, like, and this goes with the magic wand question for me. If you remember anything I said today, and if anybody remembers anything I say today, it will be this one thing I'm about to say. You need to have a servant's heart, and that's whether you're a Christian or not. If you're going to be in a long-term committed relationship with a person, in a romantic entanglement, whatever that's going to look like, you need to have a servant's heart. Now, the catch here is you need to both be doing that. But servant's heart, where you do things because they're the right thing to do. You do things because they're the nice, kind things to do. Oh, they, maybe they have a particular, it's not like an actual medical issue really, but maybe their feet get sore. And they, maybe they like a good foot rub just because, right? Well, maybe you put your big boy panties on and rub your wife's feet, right? Why? There's no why. You love your wife or you love your husband. That's why you do it, right?
This is so. I mean, I love that. It's like, as a Christian, I love that. As somebody picturing a future relationship, I love that. But it's so counterintuitive to the world we live in, where we're almost viewing dating as though we're consumers. Like, what can you do for me? How can you improve my life? How can you bring me pleasure? Like, what are you giving to me? And you're saying, like, do the opposite.
Yep. Yeah. Like, you yourself, again, have a servant's heart, be the and I'll frame it up this way. In addition to it, goes right along with it. And that's why I say this is also part of the magic wand thing, because I think that's a mindset people need to have in general at large with everybody, but also especially with your romantic entanglements and, those long-term relationships. If I'm going to be living with you and married to you and having children with you, which is statistically, maybe not the marriage part, but statistically, most humans are going to cohabitate with somebody as a romantic entanglement, and most humans are going to do that and have at least one child. Like, it's just statistically likely. Even with the lower birth rates, that's still statistically likely, right? If you're going to do all that, you should make it as easy as possible to live with the other human as you can, right? If I do something that my wife finds irritating and she says, hey, could you not do that? That's kind of irritating. Some people say, well, that's a her problem. And I think, well, it kind of depends on what it is, right? If it's objectively a reasonable request to, like, not do the thing, well, what is it to me? If she's clearly more distressed about it than I am, and vice versa, then why would I not suck it up and try to avoid doing the thing? But again, it's a two-way street, right? And so the Gottmans, they talk about, the things that basically resentment and bitterness is if any one person has that, right? That's one of the four horsemen plus one, as they call it, that'll ruin the relationship. But they're right? And that's why I say, like, it takes two to tango on this. So you both need to have that. But I think, again, one thing that's the magic wand thing to change, and people need to have that mindset. And also, if you're gonna engage in a romantic entanglement with someone, have a servant's heart, and hopefully you both have that. Because I see it all the time. Like, couples that appear to have that going on, they look pretty solid to me. People that don't necessarily have that going on, they look a little shaky. So, but when you both have that mindset, because also, like, that also implies working towards the same goals, right? If you both want harmony in your relationship, again, conflict's unavoidable, but if you both seek to, again, like, I'm going to do everything I can to do good things for, since I'm a dude and I'm a husband, I'm going to do everything I can to do good things for my wife because I want good things for her. I am for her, not against her. And this is the same thing with my wife to me. Like, she loves me and wants good things for me and with me and all that. And, if you do that and you get in the habit of doing that and you're both doing that, it's a hard sell for me that, any relationship could fail at some point for a number of reasons. But ultimately, I think if that's the hard, we're holding on to that mindset, right? I think if both parties are holding on to that in a relationship, it'll weather just about any storm. It'll stand the test of time. You'll be relatively bulletproof, because if that's your focus, right? That's the other thing the data says, especially if you have kids, like in the churches, it's God, marriage, kids. In the psychology data, it's parents, kids, right? Like, so nurture that, that couple relationship. And if you had a family, like, everything will probably, or increased likelihood of everything flowing out well otherwise. But like I say, I've said it like 3 or 4 times, have a servant's heart. Both parties need a servant's heart.
Awesome. Well,
real quick addendum, though, I just want to say this before we go. Real quick addendum. In case anybody's wondering, and if you're wondering, I went on some dates with my wife. I, start having feelings. I had this thing in my head of, I don't want this to go any further, and we, it not work out. So one day we met up, and I said, hey, I really like you. I could see this going somewhere. But before it gets too far along, there's some things that you're going to want to know about me that will come up if we're married and stay married. It will absolutely come up. And that's a lot of the things I mentioned, right? Like, do we want kids? There it goes again. Do we want kids? How do we want to educate them? How do we want to raise them? All the things. There were also a handful of little things from my past that possibly could come up, stuff that someone might want to know. So I literally just threw it all on the table, and I said, and if you don't like any of that and you're freaked out by what I said and you want to bail and you're done, fine, no harm, no foul. I won't even be mad. And I did that, and she said, I'm cool with that. And then she just turned right around and said, okay, since you did that. And then she went and did the same with me. Then we had a little 5-minute period of a little awkwardness. And then after that, everything's been fine. And like I say, I've been married 22 years and 3 kids, and had a lot of, good times. I would say mostly good. Life was what got in the way that, made things kind of blah,
It's good to see an inspiring success story, though.
Yeah, and like I say, I know some people will be like, what, you're just going to throw all that at them? But, I mean, I don't know. I think I end with that because, you mix, I don't know, the purpose, in my opinion, of dating is to find a spouse.
Yeah.
So, can we just be upfront with everybody from the get-go? And I think, that's the other thing for you on the practical side. It'd be interesting to see what returns you get if you you don't have to do it exactly like that, but if you again, servant's heart, and maybe just be very direct about everything and see if anybody runs for the hills or if they stick around.
Yeah.
I mean, it can't be worse than, you know what I mean, than what's been happening.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, those are my 2 cents on all that.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining me. I love this conversation. I'd love to have a conversation with you again sometime.
Yeah, sure. Let me know.
All right.
Find me.